Buenos días con todas y todos. It's an honor for me to be here in Mexico City today. I'm pleased to acknowledge the valuable support of many friends and colleagues. Talking about young MSM in Latin America, today I plan to cover definitions, epidemiologic data, sexual risks and access issues, as well as their social determinants, and a few intervention models studied in the region, to conclude with some take-home messages. But let's start acknowledging that we're talking about human beings. For example, let's meet Jorge. A 23-year-old employee, Jorge got HIV from a boyfriend he had been going out with for a few months. Upon his diagnosis, he started free treatment through the Mexican Institute of Social Security. He had excellent adherence to ART and remained undetectable until 3 months ago when he had to stop treatment temporarily due to a shortage of ARTs. He has also developed anal warts and has been waiting for surgery for months since he can't pay for the procedure elsewhere. He feels that his doctor does not treat him very well, perhaps due to his sexual orientation. Let's keep in mind this personal story while we move on. So, there are various overlapping technical definitions related to young people. Here we're focusing on young men 15 to 24, recognizing that they comprise two groups, those 15 to 17 who are legally minors with restricted rights, and those 18 to 24 who are, say, emerging adults. As this goes beyond identity, we say young gay and other men who have sex with men, recognizing that there are issues about age of consent to consider. Then, given the data available, I will focus mostly on Spanish and Portuguese-speaking individuals. Of course, trans women are a distinct population not covered in this talk. Let's move to some epidemiologic data. For your information, many of my points will be illustrated by data from the following sources. First, the Latin American MSM Internet Survey, LAMIS, with online responses from around 65,000 MSM from 18 Latin American countries in early 2018. Please look for the LAMIS oral and poster presentations at this conference. Second, the IMPREP online survey, conducted as a formative component of the IMPREP demonstration study in Brazil, Mexico, and Peru, with responses from nearly 20,000 men, MSM. Please look for the IMPREP oral and poster presentations at IAS 2019 as well. Third, UNAIDS country reports, and fourth, data from HIV notification and behavioral surveillance from Brazil and Peru. Here, and in many other figures, I will compare two age groups, young MSM 18 to 24 and older MSM over 24 years old. This is the LAMIS online survey. With some variation across countries, the overall reported HIV prevalence was, say, 6.5 among young MSM and 20.5% among older MSM. However, when we look at reports of HIV diagnosis during the past 12 months, young and older MSM report similar figures, around 3% per year. This is a proxy for HIV incidence and is quite high. This is compelling information from HIV surveillance in Brazil. The upper left-hand figure shows the progression of annual HIV reporting by gender and age group between 2009 and 2017. One group O grows steadily across the decade, young males 18 to 24. When we look at transmission categories among those young males, to the right-hand side, 81% are classified as MSM. Now let's look at HIV reporting in Peru. The upper figures allow us to compare HIV reporting for two 5-year periods, 2008 to 12 and 2013 to 17. Cases reported among the 15 to 19 and 20 to 24 groups taken together went up from 3,500 to almost 6,000, that is 68% more between the two periods. Let's move to some the two bottom figures, actually, in this graph Still, the two bottom figures portray the evolution over time of heterosexual and homosexual cases among males, clearly showing an increase in homosexual transmission, while heterosexual transmission remains stable. This change started to appear among the 15 to 24 group as early as 2018, that is about 11 years ago. The examples for Brazil and Peru are consistent with the regional pattern of a concentrated epidemic. About 2/3 of new HIV infections among 15 to 24-year-olds in 2016 took place among males. The right-hand figure shows that such trend is becoming bolder over time, and that the annual figures have continued to grow among young males while remaining relatively stable among females. About STIs now. Almost 9% of the 18 to 24 LAMIS participants reported having been diagnosed with either syphilis or chlamydia or gonorrhea over the past 12 months. This is clearly a high figure. Now let's review data on sexual behavior, access to care, and vulnerability. This figure about self-perceived HIV risks shows that despite the high HIV and STI rates observed, the majority of these men consider themselves to be at low risk. This other figure from LAMIS shows that about half of young MSM, as compared to 2/3 of older MSM, reported having been tested in the prior 12 months. This is an estimation of the HIV cascade for adolescents 12 to 17 in Peru as of 2017, as well as of the gaps to reach the 90-90-90 goals. Gaps are 17% to reach the 90% diagnosed, 15% to reach the 90% on treatment, but 42% to reach the 90% of viral suppression. In this figure from LAMIS, overall among young MSM who report an HIV diagnosis, 80% report having started ART, but only 64% report viral suppression, compared to 90% and 84% among older MSM respectively. For various reasons, levels of access to treatment, and especially viral suppression, are clearly lower among young MSM. What about sexual behavior? In Brazil, Guimarães and collaborators compared the younger groups of two samples of MSM from 2009 and 2016 respectively. Among young MSM, there was some progress. For example, less binge drinking, more HIV testing, and more access to information and services. However, unprotected receptive anal sex increased by 24%, illicit drug use by 22%, and low risk self-perception by 25%. Also from LAMIS, MSM of both groups report similar frequencies of condomless anal sex with non-steady partners of unknown status, and of recent drug use to enhance sex. These data from the InPrep online survey show that young MSM report more receptive and less insertive condomless anal sex than older MSM. This may reflect age-related changes in role preference or role negotiation, but also a power dynamics. Awareness about PrEP among young MSM ranged between 61% in Brazil and 37% in Peru. This may be explained in part by the existing PrEP policy in Brazil and by the proximity to PrEP information from the US to Mexico. In Peru and most other Latin American countries, the topic is still being introduced. These are figures for both PEP and PrEP use by age group. Despite the reportedly high behavioral risk, only 2.4% of young MSM and 5% of older MSM reported any PEP use in the past. This may be due to low availability and low awareness of non-occupational PEP. The figures are even worse for PrEP use, reported only by 0.6% of young MSM and 1.3% of older MSM. This means that access to both PEP and PrEP among Latin American MSM remains marginal, and this is very important. Willingness to use PrEP is similar across both age groups, between 50 and 60%. Often neglected, mental health is critical in discussing the experience of young MSM. In the LAMIS study, 62% of young MSM, compared to 54% of older MSM, reported symptoms of anxiety and/or depression in the past 2 weeks. Likewise, more young MSM than older MSM reported suicidal ideation in the past 2 weeks. Concerning use of alcohol and drugs in LAMIS, young MSM reported a slightly higher use of alcohol at 23% compared to 20% among older men. And likewise, the use of drugs in the past 2 months is similar across both age groups for most drugs. Now we will focus on social determinants of vulnerability. Let's consider the study of another young gay man. 21-year-old Marco works at a bank in the city of northern Mexico. As many gay friends, he's constantly checking Grindr and meeting new people. He uses condoms regularly, but the guys he meets are increasingly interested in barebacking. Recently, after giving up and having raw sex for the first time with a new guy he liked, he freaked out. He knew about PrEP, but was too embarrassed to go to a clinic and ask for it. Fortunately, he came out negative, but now he fears it will happen again. He wants to try PrEP, but it's not available where he lives. Some of Marco's experiences illustrate the challenges that young MSM in Latin America face to remain HIV negative. At least he's not a minor. As in many countries, parental consent is required to access HIV-related services. While gay marriage has been legalized in Mexico and the legal framework is positive, he still feels that others are judgmental about homosexuality and is not comfortable talking to a provider about his private life. He also feels that clinics are odd and do not make people like him feel very well. Indeed, young MSM in the region are experiencing a world with many contradictory changes. The legal frameworks range from neutral to very positive, but it may seem that legal recognition has favored the mainstreaming of a commodified and superficial version of gay culture. Gay sexualities have changed as well, often adopting global trends such as new sexual meanings and new, more exciting but riskier sexual practices. The ongoing decay in condom use observed among MSM of all ages, however, is taking place in a context where larger gaps in HIV diagnosis, treatment, and viral suppression and marginal PrEP use are observed compared to high-income settings. The world today cannot be imagined without the internet. It has caused a radical transformation in communications, social interaction, and sexuality. Sex-related searches, online pornography, and apps remain among the most frequent motives of internet use to date. Its free and limited offer of all kinds of pornography is changing people's perception of sexual normalcy and promoting unrealistic expectations that especially young people may not be able to assess critically. The normalization of dating apps with geolocation facilitates hookups significantly and is changing the way people meet their sex partners. Many people, in fact, develop a love-hate relationship with them and justify their use out of loneliness and boredom. A few even stop using them, claiming that these apps are really addictive. In one way or another, apps have become very popular in both age groups. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of MSM in the InPrep online survey indicated high use of these apps. In this radically changed environment, driven by new technology and the market, sex education policies are largely insufficient. In a context of unlimited access to sexual content and opportunities, policymakers continue to debate whether or not to offer sex education at school. Whatever sex education is currently offered, it is by no means sufficient to provide meaningful support to young people. It should be really completely rethought. Today's extremely polarized world hinders our ability to focus on balance. Fighting sexual oppression may give the impression that sexual freedom means no self-regulation. We may then end up measuring such sexual freedom by how much sex we have. We may then end up and equate it with success or happiness. Eventually, we might start feeling that we are being used or that we are using other people. We might then feel dehumanized. But likely we might continue with this because it adheres a strong social norm in gay culture in many settings and provides temporary relief for other problems. Young MSM who are learning to play the gay game will likely follow this path as long as there is no serious discussion about sexual lifestyles and choices within gay communities. And yes, it has to be an insider discussion, nothing imposed from the outside. But young people should be prompted to ask themselves why they have sex, what their personal sex needs are, and what they could do to ensure that their sex lives make them feel happier, more fulfilled, and more humane. Intervention strategies aimed at young MSM and Latin America are almost non-existent. Let's quickly review some of them. Ahora e Agora, the time is now, was a demonstration project aimed at developing, implementing, and evaluating for feasibility a web-based intervention to promote HIV prevention, provide free anonymous HIV self-testing, and ensure linkage to care among those found positive. Led by Fiocruz and collaborators, this community-wide program took place in Curitiba, Brazil, between 2015 and 2017, including HIV self-testing kits to other online mobile testing units and testing in public facilities. The study showed that continuation and information technologies are promising in attracting young MSM who value anonymity and privacy, particularly those never tested and those at high risk who need frequent testing. Currently, I'm part of the IMPREP consortium, implementing PrEP on MSM and trans women in Brazil, Mexico, and Peru. A sister project started in Brazil around the same time, led by University of Bahia, is called PrEP 1519 and focuses on young men 15 to 19 years old. This project incorporates a sophisticated communications component to appeal to young MSM. For example, they have created Amanda Selfie, an AI character who will guide young MSM through information appointments. Project implementation in Brazil has been delayed as conducting sexuality research with minors is still challenging in all the region. The formative study shows interesting information. Please visit the oral and poster presentation at this conference. Let's move on to Orgullo Plus, an ongoing clinical trial with MSM and trans women in Lima, Peru, testing a 3-year intervention with a community component and a health systems component that we are conducting in collaboration with UCSF. A community component, Generación Actual, is adapted from the Empowerment Project. Core elements involve a leadership group, a community center, mobilization activities, workshops, informal outreach, and a staff of 2 coordinators. The ongoing process evaluation has produced some early evidence of potential effectiveness. While the intervention is not limited to young MSM, we have observed a considerable increase in their participation. Such increase seems related to several reasons, not only including the many HIV-related resources that the program offers, but also factors related to increased opportunities and resources for personal development and well-being in a safe and welcoming social space. Finally, UNICEF conducted a pilot project focused on leadership training of 30 LGBT adolescents who were natural leaders in their regions in Brazil. The project had online presence through various social media and websites and conducted advocacy in various public spaces. The project achieved more visibility for this group, contributed to the public debate on sexual diversity, mediated the provision of peer support from the trained leaders to other adolescents, and overall bridged crucial gaps. Let me conclude with a few take-home messages. Today, we have gone through data indicating that there is a significant HIV problem among young MSM in our region, with HIV and STI incidences similar to older MSM, while ART coverage among those diagnosed and especially viral suppression of the latter, are much lower than among other MSM. This alarming trend is, in the regional HIV epidemic is by no means recent. It has been going on silently for more than a decade, but we have failed to pay attention. Its immediate determinants include an increase in casual sexual activity in the context of a fall in condom use with minimal PrEP rollout and insufficient levels of viral suppression among positives. Drug use to enhance sexual activity is also common. Young MSM report practices similar to those of older MSM and in fact report more frequent mental health issues and also generally neglected. Key determinants of this problem include the legal and other structural barriers that minors and others face to access testing and sexual health services, a highly sexualized mainstream culture facilitated by the internet, a commodified, quickly changing gay sexuality, policies of sex education that are generally insufficient vis-a-vis the emerging sexual issues, the lack of visible nurturing communities where young MSM could learn critically how to make informed decisions about their lives and sexualities, and limited appropriate interventions and programs for this group. In that context, we need a few critical things. First, we need to remove absurd legal barriers that minors face when they seek health care, always seeking the right balance between the protection of minors from abuse and recognition of their sexuality and autonomy. We also need to offer really meaningful sex education with content that can help the young in the current context. And definitely we should not restrict internet access. We know where it leads to. Rather, we should help young people develop skills to assess their own needs and decide. Then we should improve access to prevention and care services, doing as much as we can in the public settings to creatively reach young MSM with strategies such as those used in The Time Is Now and PrEP 15 to 19, for example. And we also need to recognize the natural limitations of the public sector and identify appropriate ways of working directly with communities and fund their work, possibly using approaches like those of Orgullo Plus and UNICEF. It is indeed crucial to avoid the takeover of commercial interests and the reduction of the community to a market segment. A community should nurture and educate the young. It should generate safe and balanced spaces for discussion of ideas where discrepancy is respected. The point is, how could sexuality contribute to happier, more fulfilling, more humane lives? Finally, we should recognize and celebrate differences, while at the same time identify and emphasize similarities, say, between young MSM and young men in general, or between young men and young women too. Young people do it all the time. Let's learn from them. This is Vayamos San Juan, a non-LGBT group, youth music group from a low-income area of Lima. They were fantastic in the recent local gay pride parade. Our world today is full of unnecessary conflicts that never get resolved. If we learn to work together more often, acknowledging that we are all human beings with similar needs and dreams, we could save a great deal of energy that could be used indeed in making everybody's lives happier, more fulfilling, and more humane. Muchas gracias.